Hey everyone, welcome to another Screenwriting Tips. My name is Tony D, and we're here to talk about crime. I did a video about writing a mafia screenplay, and thanks for the suggestion out there. I got a suggestion to do a thing about thrillers and a thing about crime. I did one on political thrillers, and I did one on the mafia, but I haven't done a general crime one, so I'm going to do that. Okay, so writing a screenplay, a crime story. There's several ways you can go with it. The most obvious way, of course, is the drama. Depending on whether or not the crime was real and you're basing it after a true story. I did one of those for a client. It was very interesting. It was also funny. There's usually a bit of humor in it because criminals tend to be very rebellious characters. Even the mafia guys are a little like that. They do their own thing. They walk their own path, and that's why we love them, right? Because come on, doggy, you want to come up? Come up and be in a video? She's running away. So anyhow, the main element in the crime movie is going to be at least a crime, maybe multiple crimes. I also enjoy funny takes. But that one's really hard. It's hard to do a funny crime story. I'm a big fan of Guy Ritchie, especially his early work. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch are two of the funniest movies and well-done movies you'll ever see. Real tight scripts about the, I guess you could call it, the criminal underground in the UK. If you haven't seen those, they're really good. And usually they center around somebody owing somebody money. The first thing you have to do, doggy, don't rub your butt on the carpet, that's wrong. The first thing you have to do if you're writing a crime drama is you have to make your protagonist likable enough so we could follow him. Even though these guys are going to commit a crime, we want to feel that they're not bad guys. Okay, so there are a few different ways you can do that in the first act. First, you could set up, and this is the classic setup, this is the last job. Or he's out of the business, but he gets pulled back in. Great movie for that is, I believe it was called Sexy Beast. Yeah, it's about a retired criminal, English criminal. He's retired in Spain. And he gets pulled back in to do one last job, and for reasons which I won't go into it. See the movie; it's fairly obscure, but it's really good. So you want to make the protagonist likable, or if it's a drama. Now my dog's going crazy. You couldn't rub your butt on the carpet, and now you're going nuts. You want to make the protagonist likable, or at least like he has no choice. In a drama, usually it'll be like he has no choice. He owes somebody money, somebody's going to be killed, somebody else owes money. It usually all centers around money in some way. So the first act is your main character getting involved in the heist or the crime or whatever it is. The second act is going to be the planning of the crime. Doggy, good gravy. The second act's going to be the planning of the crime. And, depending on how much info you have, that could be very interesting. When I wrote I would basically call it a crime drama based on a true story. The crime that was committed was very interesting and very unique. And it was kind of a borderline crime. Yeah, there was definitely some illegality in it, but at the same time, some of what they were doing were not illegal. Was not illegal. I'll give you an example of a story like that, and I think this has been made into a movie. If not, it certainly should be. That was the story of, and this is a true story. There was a worker at the U.S. Mint, and what he did was he noticed that they were throwing out old dollar bills to be incinerated, and he stole them. But the thing is, it wasn't illegal to take those dollar bills because I believe the deal was if you decide to throw something out, legally it's no longer anybody's property. So he stole the money, but they kind of couldn't. First off, they couldn't find the money. It's a whole thing. You should look it up on the internet. It's pretty interesting. They never quite found. He definitely got away with a lot of money. He eventually got caught because he let in one of his relatives, I think his brother-in-law, and he panicked one night and threw the money down a sewer, and then somebody found it, and it kind of unraveled from there. But I'm almost sure they made a movie about it. If they haven't, there's a story you could write a screenplay about. But the thing is, you know, the crime is important. The details of the crime are important. Now, you had that magician movie where they were committing heists. That's a little high end. It's a little more unrealistic. Ocean's 11, movies like that. They don't appeal to me because they're too unrealistic. I feel that a crime story really needs to be grounded in reality because there's a very gritty reality to the world of crime. And there should be an element of danger, absolutely, because being a criminal is a very dangerous thing. It's extremely dangerous. There are people in the criminal underworld who would just kill you for your money. They're the classic example of the characters from Casino, Joe Pesci and the guy who plays his brother. Those are based on two real-life mobsters who actually killed people for their cars and the money they had in their wallets. I mean, that's pretty extreme, and that's pretty scary. So their deal was if you walked into their bar or whatever, they would chat you up, and if they found out you were, you know, alone and nobody knew where you were and maybe you didn't have any relatives, they'd get you drunk, take you outside, boom, that'd be the end of you, and they'd sell your car, take your money, your jewelry, whatever you had. So that, I mean, they eventually got their comeuppance, but I mean, that's scary. That's a scary crime. And you have to be aware of that too. Crime is a scary thing for a lot of people, especially people who have been victims of crime. So don't treat it as a light thing. To make a protagonist likable, you have to be aware that just certain crimes are going to, you know, for lack of a better term, they're going to trigger people. You know, you're not going to make a lot of criminals likable. I mean, a home invasion, a murder, somebody who's assaulted, you know, there's a lot of people that can't even watch those movies. So you have to be very careful. It's a little different in, say, a mafia movie, where you kind of go into that expecting some of that stuff. And typically the mafia guys, especially in the movies, are going to stick to, well, they only kill other mobsters, or they only kill people who cross them, you know, typically. And then, you know, you got the Joe Pesci character in, like, Goodfellas. He's, like, off the deep end, right? You know, he's a scary dude. And there are guys like that, too. So you have to be aware of that. The tone is very important in a crime movie. If it's going to be a drama, though, that kind of stuff is definitely going to work in your favor. Because those kind of characters who are very dangerous, that's the danger of committing these crimes and being involved in that underworld. They're trying, a lot of times it's characters who are trying to get out from under the criminal underworld. They're going to commit this one crime and then get out. But really it's a tragedy, so they're not going to get out because they're tragic figures. They're doing bad things. Deep down they know it. They have this delusion that they're going to make it, but we kind of all know that they're going to get what they deserve. That's what happens a lot of time in movies. People get what they deserve. And that tends to be very satisfying for an audience, you know. And yes, you can have characters that do get away with it, but, you know, it's not as satisfying as especially in a drama. If it's a crime drama, you know, for a guy to, like, plan and plot and do all this stuff, and then he goes to jail anyway, or he dies, you know, that's epic. It's pretty epic. So the second part of the second act is definitely going to be the planning of the crime, and then, you know, the practice. And, you know, in Goodfellas, the crime was the airport robbery, but really the airport robbery goes well. It's the third act the fallout from the robbery that ruins everything, because people get paranoid, they investigate, people start spending money, and next thing you know, people start dying, and it all falls to pieces. So it can go like that too. But in general, if you're doing, say, a positive, for lack of a better term, crime story where the character's going to survive, then the climax of the movie is going to be the actual heist, and then the danger is they're going to get caught. If you're doing something that's more grim and gritty, like a Goodfellas, it's going to be either how the character survives, like Henry Hill, he manages to go into witness protection program and saves himself that way, or, you know, it could be, you know, a tragic ending, everybody dies, or, you know, sometimes they get out, sometimes they don't. It kind of depends on the tone you want to go to. It kind of depends on the character too. Sometimes there's nobility in a criminal character who makes a sacrifice to save another character, or to save, you know, their family or whomever. They're gonna let the criminal organization kill them or whatever, or, you know, to make sure the family is safe. There's a great movie, and if you haven't seen it, let me tell you, Tom Hardy gives the most electric performance you'll ever see. And you got to stick with it to the end, because it's the final scene in a movie that is absolutely jaw-dropping. It's a movie called The Drop. It's the last movie with James Gandolfini, and he's in it too, and he's great. But Tom Hardy is so amazing in the movie, in the final scene. I'm just telling you. I'm not going to spoil anything on that one. Just see The Drop if you haven't, because let me tell you something. It's a mind-blowing ending. Mind-blowing. The transformation of Tom Hardy at the end of that movie, whew, it'll give you chills. It's that good. And a really good screenplay. And again, it gets into the criminality of The Drop. In this case, it's the organized crime figures. They pick places around the city to make their, I guess it's a weekly drop-off, and they always pick different bars, right? So different bars in the city become the drop. And on that night, they collect all this money, and then someone shows up and it picks it up, and they have to go along with it. They don't have any choice. And of course, I think you know what happens next. So it's always about money going missing or whatever. So some of the money goes missing, and it all spirals down from there. So, see The Drop. Phenomenal movie. Okay, so what is a crime movie really about? It's really not about the crime. It's about characters. They're trying to overcome adversity. We're trying to overcome adversity, and the adversity, it tends to be the circumstances of living in that world, in that urban, decaying landscape, which is full of criminality. They tend to be poor. They tend to be, very much under the thumb of organized crime, or at least organized crime adjacent, and they have to be very careful. In Lock, Stock, Two Smoking Barrels, the whole thing's about a poker game where the guys get ripped off, and then they have to come up with the money by the end of the week, or they're all going to be kneecapped or whatever. So, a lot of times it's a fight, a boxing match that's fixed by one side or the other. I mean, the amount of crime you can pull out is just, or it's a heist, So you, just like anything else, you got to do your research. So you got to know how these things work. I mean, certainly the criminals do. They do their research. If they're going to rob a place, Bad Santa, so, it's a comedy and it's a crime movie, because Santa's going to rob the department store of its giant deposit, and that's part of the plot. There's more to it than that, but that's part of the plot. So you need to know how it all works. And these days, it's more and more sophisticated how stores get their money or ship their money. A lot of things are done electronically, very, very difficult to steal electronic cash. It's not just sitting around a store anymore. So, you know, stores, you know, you could go into a store, they may only have a few $1,000, you know, and that's not a lot of money to risk going to jail for years. So criminals scope these things out, you know. The kind of criminal is going to rob like a supermarket. You know, there's so many, I mean, there's video cameras, there's armed guards sometimes, there's safes with timers on them, and there's electronic cash. So there are all these hurdles you got to overcome. You got to know where there's some money, you know, and if you can hack money, which is a lot easier in some respects in terms of, you know, if you know your computers, you can hack the money. The reward is almost instant. Getting caught, you know, there's a lot of ways you're going to get caught in that, but, excuse me, I got an itch. You know, you're at least, if you know what you're doing with a computer, there are a lot of ways to hide your tracks electronically. The problem with, you know, electronic thievery and hackery, it's not very interesting visually, right? You know, and back in the day when hacking was new, they'd have all this crazy rock music and guys typing on the keyboard and, you know, Matrix style numbers coming down the screen and, you know, shots of wires and zooming down the wires. I mean, you know, even that kind of stuff, it's not realistic anymore. It's not a time thing anymore. These guys have all the time in the world to hack things. And they either could do it, either they have the expertise or they can't. You know, and either they get caught or they don't. So, you know, it's not, the real challenge is if you do a movie like that is how do you make it interesting visually? It's really tough. That's why bank robberies are still cool, you know? It's cool to watch these guys rob a bank. They gotta have guns, bulletproof vests, and a getaway car. And so there's action. There's often action in a crime drama. But in the modern day society, even banks don't have that much money. So is it really worth it? Stealing a car, getting bulletproof vests and machine guns, going into a place, maybe you get, you know, $10,000 in cash, $20,000 maybe. And you got to deal with die packs, and you got a bunch of checks, and you got to burn them because you can't cash them. So it's tough. It's tough to commit a crime in the modern era. So period pieces are often a solution to that. You know, you go back. That's what Westerns are a lot of times. Essentially, Westerns are crime movies because they deal with, you know, outlaws, robbing trains, robbing banks. That's back in the day when money was paper and gold, and that was it. And you get the gold, boy, phew, nobody's going to trace that. These days, there's so much stuff that gets traced back to you. So, you know, you really got to do your research in a lot of ways. You know, one of the things you can do is you can scan the internet for crime that actually happened, read the details of it, and just change it up, you know, change it up. Take a crime that actually happened and rewrite it, you know, with different characters, different circumstances, basically the same kind of crime, the same kind of details. You know, a lot of these crimes are timely too. I read the book Catch Me If You Can, which I believe it was Leonardo DiCaprio starred as the con man. But that was very much a book and con man of his time, because some of the scams he pulled, they can't be pulled today. So like, for instance, one of the scams, which was a great one, is he made himself a security guard uniform. And back in the day, say at a mall, they would have a big deposit place. You could drop in. The end of the night, all the stores would drop. They had a big deposit thing you could drop your money in. And then that, you know, an armored car would come and take it to the bank. Well, he noticed that when there was a problem with the thing, they would just send a guard out and he'd stand there and collect all the money, collect all the deposits. So that's what he did. He made a fake guard uniform for himself, made a fake ID, everything. And he just stood there, and all the stores at the end of the night showed up, and he just opened the sack and they put all the money in, and then he left with the sack. and they thought he worked for the armored car unit. No, he did not. He left with all the money, and they couldn't get him. They didn't have. This was prior to video cameras, so they didn't have him on tape. People just trusted him, and that was again in an era where people paid with money or check. So he throws away the checks and he gets all the cash. And these days, that kind of stuff they wouldn't do. I mean, they still kind of do it, but, there's more checks and balances for the armed security guards. They're just not going to, first guy who shows up. But there are still guys, there have been cases where they get an armored car, they get uniforms, and they pull up to a place and pretend to be the armored car guys. And they show up 10 minutes before, they take the deposits, and then they leave. But they usually get caught because you have to go through all that elaborate stuff. If you had to have a truck and uniforms and more than one guy, I mean, it's a lot of people to bring in on what's essentially a robbery of a few $1,000s, and 10 minutes later the real guys show up. You've been robbed. You got to get rid of that truck. You got to get rid of the uniforms. You got to disappear. That's a lot of effort for potentially very little payoff. So you have to calculate that in, when you're writing these things. You have to know what crimes are and what is really going to pay off and why these characters would go through all that trouble. Now there are some parts of the country that are a little behind the times. Yeah, you might be able to do it. I mean, there's always a loophole. Now, this isn't a crime, but I just recently watched a 60 Minutes thing about a guy who he figured out that mathematically that there was a lottery where there were 6 numbers in the lottery, but if nobody won, they would kick down the numbers to 5 instead of 6. And that put the odds such in favor of the players that he calculated if he bought about $1,300 of tickets, he could almost guarantee himself a winner. And he would win, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And he did this for a few years. And they bought more and more tickets and kept winning and winning and winning. And eventually, again, it wasn't illegal. They discontinued the game. A few other people got in on it because they figured out the math too. But this is a guy who just figured it out walking from his car. So it's not technically a crime story, but, it has that crime feel. I mean, he's not doing anything illegal, but that's the kind of fantasy crime movies often are. It's the fantasies of getting a lot of money all at once. That's what drives it for the audience. They dream of being rich, And so the idea of robbing a bank and running away to Mexico with $1 million, I mean, that's appealing, to a certain level. But, the reality is it's very, very difficult. You'd be on the run all your life. Likely you'd be caught. And even if you got away, you'd be a fugitive. And, your money just disappears when you're a fugitive. You got to pay for cash, everything. I mean, if you look at Whitey Bulger, who was on the lam for quite a while, and he had a lot of money, but he had to keep a very low profile so nobody would find him. And he eventually got caught too and died in prison. So if my recommendation, if you're doing a crime movie, know, as always, do your research. 3-act structure. Decide if it's going to be drama or comedy. Remember, drama can always have a little bit of amusing moments, but you got to pick one or the other. I would say don't do a dramedy. I think they're wishy-washy, lukewarm, decision making. Dramedies to me don't work. I think that's a terrible term. It's either a drama with some amusing moments, or it's a comedy that may have a few dramatic moments. I think you got to have 51% one way or the other. And really I think your mix should be more like 75-25. Either 75% drama, probably less than 25% comedy. I would say closer to 10 in a drama. If you want to, the danger of doing a dramedy is that the danger of doing a drama is that someone is going to be amused at a dramatic moment when they shouldn't be. With comedy, you got a little more leeway. You can do a little more drama in a comedy than you can do comedy in a drama. I think the danger is less the other way. You could certainly do action in both. And in crime, is there crime action? Yeah. Yeah, sure. You know, like the Hong Kong stuff. Those are definitely crime movies, crime action. Again, you know, those could be, they tend to be more action than crime. It just makes sense that the protagonists are criminals because criminals, you know, it's more believable that they're going to be in violent situations. But there's definitely going to be some action in any crime movie. Definitely going to be some gunplay, more often than not. But the nice thing about it, from a low budget standpoint, you know, you can have scenes with guns, and it doesn't have to be, you know, you don't need stunts. You don't usually need a stunt team to pull them off if you shoot it the right way. Now, if you're going to get into a big shootout and things are getting blown to pieces, well, then you're talking more expense and whatever. But, you know, even just to shoot a character and have them go and just fall to the ground, you know, that can be done fairly effectively in a movie and done very cheaply. So, you know, it's usually a good idea in your spec script repertoire to have a crime drama or crime story of some kind. Because they're cheap to do. They're often, the stakes are very high, the characters are very interesting. I mean, it's got everything going for it, and they're very universal for the most part. Yeah, there's some cultural stuff in there that can be a problem. Obviously, if you're doing the mafia, that may not resonate in, say, Asia as much as, say, the Yakuza might or the Triads might. But they get it. I mean, it's not like people in Asia don't know what the mafia are. It's just that they, you know, they actually live with the Triads and the Yakuza more than they would, say, Italian or Sicilian mafia guys. Europe, it would be the other way around, would tend to be more mafia. United States, pretty much anything goes. We're a melting pot of crime and everything else. So, you know, you can explore crime families. That's certainly a thing. I mean, if you're just doing a straight up crime story, then, you know, mafia and crime are going to be very close, obviously. If you're going to do, your focus is going to be on a criminal organization that's a family, well, then you're really in mafia territory, a Yakuza, Triad, organized crime territory. If you're going to do criminals who are not made guys, who are not part of the family, then you're in more straight up crime stuff. And you know, that could be something as simple as, you know, just somebody wanting to steal something, just to you know, not even for the money, just to, you know, there's a movie with Frank Langella. I forget what it's called, but his son or his grandson buys him a robot to keep him as a companion. And Langella was like I think he was a safecracker, but he's elderly now, and he teaches the robot to pull a heist basically, and the robot becomes his friend, and they pull a heist, and it's a pretty interesting little movie, and it is technically a crime movie. It's also got some elements of sci-fi, and it's definitely a drama. It's a very interesting movie. I can't think of what it's called. I think it's called like the name of the character and the robot, whatever that was. But it's also a very sad movie at the end. It's got kind of a sad ending, so be warned. But interesting take on a whole crime movie. So 3-act structure as always. Do your research on the crime, please. Don't reinvent the wheel. And, you know, the more unusual the crime, the more unusual the circumstances, the better. You know, the more unique you can make it, the better. Okay, that's it for crime scripts. My name is Tony D. I'm going to try to remember to do thrillers next time. Check me out at the Webcomic Factory and Superfat for my comics that also have some crime comics as well. Also, I'm on Patreon. God, I got to get on Subscribestar. When am I going to do that? Well, if you want to give me a tip, you could always tip me in BitChute. And I'm on Dailymotion and on YouTube. We will see you next time.